Hello and thank you for watching a Georgetown table. Today we're going to be making fresh pasta with semolina flour and using some techniques including some machines that will help make making fresh pasta at home very easy and something that you will hopefully do more often. The ingredient list for fresh pasta is fairly simple and easy to acquire. This recipe will make about 1 pound of pasta. It starts with 2 cups of flour, and in this case we're going to use a combination of semolina flour, which is a traditional Italian flour, and just regular all-purpose flour, 3 eggs, and some salt, and some olive oil. And this ratio of eggs to flour is pretty universal for making 1 pound of pasta. 2 cups to 3 eggs. Depending upon the moisture content in your flour, you may have to add a little bit of water to the dough to get it to the right consistency, but this is generally the approximate measurements for about 1 pound of dough. What makes this process extremely easy for the home cook is a Cuisinart, which makes quick work of the mixing and kneading of the dough, which is the first step before we start shaping it into, in this case, pappardelle noodles, which we'll show you a little later. In the bowl of our Cuisinart, we've put in a cup of all-purpose flour and a cup of semolina flour. And you should be able to find semolina in the baking area of your grocery store. It's usually amongst some of the more exotic flours like rye flour, or spelt, or things like that, or certainly you can find it in bulk at Whole Foods, but we found this at our local Safeway. Into this mix we're also going to add about, call it, a half a teaspoon of salt, and then 3 eggs. And this is just your standard Cuisinart with a regular chopping blade on it. And we'll take it for a spin. While this is turning, I'm going to add some olive oil, about 2 tablespoons. And we're looking for a relatively stiff dough, because we are going to need to work it. If it sticks to the side like this, you may need to either pulse it or add a little bit of water, which we're going to do. Okay, I've added about a tablespoon of water. Let's see how this affects the dough. The semolina flour tends to absorb a lot more liquid than the all-purpose flour, which is why we generally have to add a little bit of regular tap water to the mix. I'm going to add a little more right now. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the dough to start to spin inside the bowl, cleaning off the sides. So we're going to check the consistency of the dough. It is fairly stiff. We're now going to take it out of the machine and put it on a floured surface. This will be in our case, our granite countertops that are very clean, and we're going to knead it further for about a minute or 2 with our hands to give it a final knead before we let the dough rest. So we've turned the dough out. It's about the size of a large fist, and we're just going to work it a little bit to give it some final kneading. Good exercise as well. Now that we've kneaded the dough, it needs to rest. And we're going to flatten it into a disc then cover it completely in plastic wrap. And then pop it in the fridge for a minimum of half an hour. But you could make this 24 hours in advance before you moved on to the next step. We've let the dough sit in the fridge. This particular batch was for about 2 hours. And a couple of things happen during that period. One is the dough gets to rest, but also a process called autolyse, which is basically the grains of starch absorb more of the moisture that was part of the mixing process, and it makes the dough a little more mature. So what big guy, is going to do is he's going to unwrap it. We'll put it on the flour, and then cut it into 4 pieces because we're going to be do it in quarters. Yeah, so in half and then in half again. This just makes the dough more easily worked with. Okay, now just take one of those pieces, set it aside. Make sure there's flour on both sides. Set that aside, and then we'll cover the other 3 with a damp towel. In preparation for putting this piece of dough in through the rollers, we need to flatten it out a little bit. And so, Will, if you could just flatten that with your hands into the machine. Great, thanks, Will. The next step here is to use another great gadget. This is my Kitchenaid mixer. It's survived 15 or so. Now this is probably a wedding present, so 18 years, and even a house fire. And what they have is an attachment for the Kitchenaid mixer, which is a dough roller for pasta. And this one actually has 3 separate rollers, one for the rolling out of the pasta, then 2 for one for spaghetti, one for fettuccine. We're only going to use the rolling attachment today. But it makes quick work of this, and it allows you to work with both hands rather than just one hand as you would with a hand-cranked pasta roller. Our Kitchenaid mixer we're going to put it on a medium speed, and we have the roller opened to the first position. What we're going to do here is just knead the dough. So we're going to run it through here multiple times. We're going to fold it over in 3s, put it through again. This gives the dough a nice consistency before we start to roll it out. You can see we've got a fairly thick sheet of dough that's ready to now, we're going to start to tighten up the rollers to lengthen this particular piece. If your dough's starting to get too long, you can always cut it, which we'll do. And we're going to bring this down to the thickness of a number 6 on the rolling. Number 6? This is actually number 5. So you can see how thin that dough is getting. So once we get it down to a number 5, we'll set it aside. That's basically it for the first quarter of dough. We'll repeat that step for each of the other quarters. But we'll set this aside on a nice floured surface to let it dry a little bit. Okay, so we've rolled out all the sheets. Again, these are we set the final number was on number 5, which gives us a pretty nice thickness for pappardelle, which we're going to be making later. But we're going to hand cut it. So what we're going to do is let the sheets rest on a floured surface for about half an hour. Lets them dry out a little bit, makes them easier to cut, makes them less sticky once we do the cutting and make the pasta. So we'll let this rest here for about half an hour before we come back. So our pieces of pasta, or our sheets of pasta, have been drying now for about 30 minutes. And now we're going to cut them to size the length of our noodles. And this is a rustic noodle, so some of these edges are a little ratty. That's okay. We're going to stack them on top of each other. And again, we're not looking for perfection here. We are looking for simplicity and good flavor. So we'll stack these like book pages. Now I'm looking for about a ½ inch noodle. So I'm just going to rough cut this down along these sheets, cutting all the way through with an impeccably sharp knife. The reason we let the pasta sheets dry a little bit is it prevents them from sticking so much when we make the noodles. But it's not brittle. It's more leathery in texture. And the flour on the sheets helps to keep the noodles from sticking. And then I just toss the noodles to separate them. When we boil the pasta, that starch will end up in the water. To save this for tomorrow, I'm just going to pop this into a 1-gallon Ziploc bag, shake off as much flour as is appropriate. It doesn't need to be swimming in flour. And then we'll just pop this in the fridge until we need it. And it'll last in the fridge for several days. So we've had our pound of pasta in the fridge for a couple of days. And we've got some water boiling here. And it's going to take a very short amount of time to boil this pasta, about 2 minutes, because it is fresh pasta still. It's still very pliable. And we've got a very small amount of water in here because we're going to use the starch in the water to help thicken our pasta, or thicken our pasta sauce. So we'll put it all in here. Some of the starch is off the flour that was used to keep the pasta from sticking together. In the case of this pasta, we're going to make a little bit of carbonara with some chicken. So we're going to add about half of the mix in with the pasta we just cooked, along with a little bit of the pasta water to loosen up the pasta. Mix that together, and then we have our egg mixture, which is basically just some eggs, some salt, and a little bit of half and half. Mix that in. And then some fresh, well not fresh, aged Parmigiano Reggiano. The good stuff, the stuff you buy at Whole Foods for, I don't know, 15 bucks a brick. This is not the time to pull out the green can. Then what we'll do is we'll just serve this in bowls with the balance of the meat mixture or the carbonara mixture on top. Got the pasta. And there you have it. Not a bad way to spend a Monday night. And here is the finished dish. We just dished out the pasta that we had mixed in with the egg mixture, and then we topped it off with the balance of the sautéed chicken and vegetables and bacon, and then topped it off with a little Parmigiano Reggiano. And some black pepper, which is really important in this dish. Enjoy.